Welcome to the Wise Idea Weekly Podcast with Christopher J. Harris, focusing on life, leadership, family, marriage, and the church. We are providing tools for our inspiration and wisdom for life. Our goal is to inspire everyday people to live wise lives. If you're new to us, we release a brand new podcast weekly on Thursdays. Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode. Here's our host, Christopher J. Harris.
Hello, my friends. Welcome again to another episode of the Wise Idea Weekly Podcast. I am your host, Christopher J. Harris, and I'm so excited to have all of you guys hanging out with us, man, every single week. Like, oh, man, y'all are sending emails, y'all are inboxing us, y'all are DMing us. For those of you that don't know what that is, if you're a little bit a part of my older crowd, DM means direct message. They hit me on the DMs. I promise you, if you're 50 or 60 or 70 years old, and you're listening to my podcast. I don't know if I have any 70-year-olds listen to my podcast, but if I do, that's cool. But if you're in that age range and you start telling your family members or friends that somebody's sliding into your DMs, oh, they're going to be looking at you like you're the coolest person on the planet. So anyways, that's not what we're talking about today. But listen, guys, I want to say thank you to all of you that are sharing the podcast. You're sharing it on social media. You're leaving ratings and reviews on iTunes and Google Play and other places where the podcast is. And it's just such a huge blessing. Many of you all know, and if you've been on with me before, you know that I am very passionate about life and leadership and family and marriage and ministry. And that is, of course, the focus of our podcast. If you are new to us, let me be one of the first to say, what's up? Welcome to the party. Glad to have you. And this podcast, we are intentional about providing tools for inspiration and wisdom for life. Our goal, very simply, is to inspire everyday people to live wise lives. I believe that when wisdom becomes a part of your life, your entire life gets better. And so we've been in this long series. It's been incredible because we've had so many amazing guests on talking about how can we defend the church. I've said it every single week. I am in love with the local church, and yet I recognize that it has its flaws, it has its challenges. And so rather than run from the tension or run from the hard conversations, I said, let's bring the conversation to the podcast. And so that's what we've been doing. And today is not going to be any exception to that. I'm so excited to have Reverend Dr. Brianna Parker on from the Black Millennial Café. Reverend Parker, Dr. Parker, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And I tell you, man, this episode is going to probably be one of the greatest ever. I got to say it that way because of the number of challenges that we had just to kind of get connected to each other and get on each other's calendars and reschedule and all of that. But listen, we're here today. We're going to make it happen. And I've been following what you guys have been doing and talking about with the Black Millennial Café. So kudos and salute to you as well for that conversation and what you're doing in that space.
Thank you very much.
So tell everybody really fast, how did the Black Millennial Café get started? Tell us a little bit about that.
The Black Millennial Café was essentially started by someone who was broken spiritually, emotionally, and physically. I just buried my sister, eulogized my sister, and then 2 months from that day, I got into a near fatal car accident, which kind of thwarted my plans. And so I left my program at Baylor and I began a program at Virginia Union later on in the year to do a D-Min while I initially had PhD aspirations. And I decided to create a discipleship curriculum for Black millennials, but I wasn't allowed to do that as my project if I didn't have any statistics. And so sometimes God calls us to a place of nothingness or chaos so that we can create what does not exist. And I took that as my responsibility in that moment to create what did not exist. So I decided to research Black millennials in faith. I surveyed more than 1,100 Black millennials. I then went from there to small groups and then in-depth interviews. And at some point, people started to hear about my work, and I began to lecture about 6 months before graduation. I began to lecture, facilitate different programs, and eventually I was asked to consult. And so by that time, I realized, Uncle Sam might be a little interested in the work I was doing as well. And so I had to create something legit to be able to continue to do my work. And that's how I created the Black Millennial Café, where we serve all things Black and millennial.
Man, that's incredible. And so you obviously, I'm calling you Reverend Dr. Parker. You have an earned doctorate now?
I do, from the amazing Virginia Union University.
And the title of your dissertation was what?
Oh gosh. Let me tell it.
She's got to go. She's got to go look on the
Something.
shelf.
Listen, let me tell it. Something about the responses of Black millennial and faith. I don't know. I've named my book now, so I've forgotten my dissertation title at this point. But yeah, something like that.
Okay, well, that's incredible, and I want to salute you for that. I want to salute you for having an earned doctorate. I tell you, in this age of fast degrees and buy it on the internet, it's just admirable when we've got folks that actually have these earned degrees that have put in the blood, sweat, and tears to kind of get that done. My wife has done that, and it's amazing to see some of the conversations that we have when we're out and about, and people discover she's got an earned doctorate. They're like, "Oh, really? So tell me about that." So it's good. It's always good when we have folks that are doing that.
Thank you.
All right, so let's talk about let's talk about these millennials. Let's talk about these millennials. So many people, I think, have given the millennials a bad rap. And first of all, let's define that. So those that are listening to this, so we're all on the same page. What is that birth year? What is that age range of those that are considered millennials?
Yeah, so for my research, I used anyone born between 1981 and 1996.
Okay, so if somebody was born from 1975 to 1981, what are they considered?
That would be a buster. Now, there are a number of names, and I don't know why people hate buster, but there are a number of names for that generation, just like there were a number of names for millennials. This is what stuck, probably because people had some money behind it. But definitely one name is Busters.
Got it. All right. So why do millennials get such a bad rap? Let me hear from you. Let me talk to me. Talk to us.
Well, it's funny that millennials have a bad rap, because the tricky thing is Generation X or Busters or whatever you want to use, who were before millennials. I really trip out because we were not that far from the generation before us, but millennials were not born, we were created. So the very people who give us a bad rap and, have such ugly things to think and say about us were the people who created us. So a lot of things that people don't like to see, it's because of what was created. Like, some think we're lazy because we're attempting to follow our passion, and somebody put in us that we were allowed to follow our passion, that we didn't have to do things the way they'd always been done. We had more choices than the previous generations, whether it was food or clothing or whether or not we were going to go to church. So there are a lot of things that have created, I think, a resistance to some of our behavior. But I really don't think most people are accepting responsibility for our journey to this place, if that makes
No, that makes a lot of sense. And you started to allude to one of the questions that I was going to ask you, and that is specifically, how would you describe or suggest that millennials are different than previous generations? And so you talked about the number of options that we have. I think even, and I'd have to find the chart to quote the number specifically, but there's this chart that is pretty popular that suggests how fast innovation or people have embraced certain aspects of innovation, right? So they on that chart, it talks about the telephone, then the television, and then the internet, and then social media, right? And so it has that how long it's taken, and then or even how long did it take to get to a certain number of millions of people using that particular platform or device. And I think when you look at like radio, I mean, it took maybe like 30 years or 40 years or something for it to get to like 800 million people or something like that, or 80 million people or whatever it is. But then when you fast forward that and you get to Facebook, right? It took 3 years, 4 years, so the speed of innovation is there. So you mentioned about those options, and you mentioned about the opportunity to have more choices. What other things would you say are things that make millennials different than previous generations?
Well, I mean, we have certain impacts. So some people create generations based on just pure dates, right? Like 15 years, approximately 15 years is a generation. Others base them on circumstances or societal experiences or tragedies and traumas, like a 9/11. So those kind of things impact who a generation is. I don't think it can define a generation, but it does impact a generation in certain ways. This Trump world will definitely impact a generation in major ways. The economy has impacted us in major ways. I think one big way is technology, and maybe not in the way most people see it. I think when technology came in through gateway computers and AOL Instant Messenger and dial-up for us, millennials were really impatient possibly or bored by it. I mean, when it came in, it was exciting. But we went from being tech savvy to tech inventive, right? We had to be tech innovative. And so when we got tired of the games we were playing, we started to create our own. And I think that is a big factor in who we are today, that when things don't quite work the way we want them to, or things seem to be happening slowly, when we want put a little more fire under things, instead of putting fire under someone else, we create what doesn't exist. And I think that's probably will be the mark of this generation. I'm not exactly sure all that the next generation will bring, and I'm sure it'll be much more than we have, and I'm sure they'll do it a lot quicker because they're on our heels right now. But I think that's probably the greatest mark, that we just never settle. Whatever we wanted, we created.
That's really powerful. And so my thought process many times, Dr. Bree, is this whole idea of balance, right? So, I believe that for every good thing that we have, if we don't manage it properly, it can also be a vice. It can be a negative. So when you think about some of those things where you talked about, because I'm not a millennial, but you talked about creating things that didn't exist and moving from being tech savvy to tech innovative and so many other things that are there. What are some of those things mismanaged that has impacted this generation as well, in terms of those things that are challenges?
Possibly TV and technology, weren't always managed well. I remember we were all afraid to get online because, our parents told us that some 50-year-old guy was going to take us to a warehouse, and abuse us. Like, we were all afraid of what it meant to get on, go in a chat room because it was happening and it was like the big deal. And you probably remember this. They had Monday night specials about it, whether it meant Dateline or they were going to have like a special movie. And so I think, tech has possibly been mismanaged, but I hate to be a conspiracy theorist, but technology was being mismanaged well before millennials, probably through government, and just, wealthy people who were able to take advantage of people in ways that they would never understand. TV also. TV has, taken a leap. When I think about what was acceptable on TV early on and, what we use as appropriate comedy and entertainment versus what you see today. Maybe TV was mismanaged, especially in the reality show era. And I'm not blaming reality stars because you hear it all the time. But I am saying that reality shows have definitely influenced my generation and other generations as well in some negative ways. But I mean, I'm always cautious to talk about the negative ways that people have mismanaged things, because I think everything is mismanaged. Like you said, the Bible is mismanaged. And so I'm pretty sure tech and TV have been mismanaged in a way that has impacted my generation in some major ways.
Well, you must be in the spirit for real, because you just mentioned about the Bible being mismanaged, and I'm going to use that as our segue. We talked sort of big picture, 30,000 foot view about millennials, but obviously for the context of our discussion, you and I have in common that we both love the church, but we also recognize that it has some challenges. And so let's talk about those challenges. Let's talk about that also from a millennial standpoint, what we're seeing. And so, even for me, from a research standpoint, my passion is around church strategies and the systems of a church. And so it's interesting because particularly for urban churches, churches of color, multi-ethnic churches, all of the research suggests that millennials and younger generation folks are leaving the church. And that same research, though, says that the exception to that is people of color, that they are not leaving the church as much as other races and other cultures. So let's dig into all of that stuff. So you talked about the Bible being mismanaged. What are some of the most prevalent issues that millennials have, and are frustrated about when it comes to the church?
Probably the church's inability to see our humanity. We are recruited, as like notches on pastors' belts. We are not always a voice at the table. So they get us on to say they have young people. We got young people in our ministry. We have young people in our church, but then there's no voice or value when we get there. So probably the inability to actually acknowledge or appreciate the humanity, or even our maturity. People are still waiting for us to get older so we can lead things in the church. And, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I have often been too young to lead, too young to have certain roles, positions, and experiences, but I've never been too young to give. And I think at the point where you're willing to accept my resources and you're allowing me to invest in a church, I should definitely have voice and value. Now, it's problematic that I even have to use that, because I should not have to make a financial investment to have a voice or to have value, but it's difficult for me to see your ability to accept one and not the other.
Ooh, did she just go there, y'all? I think she did. I think she did. So let's tease that out a little bit, Dr. Bree, because I'm young, but I was raised for a great portion of my childhood by my grandparents, and so I think often that puts me in a place where I'm really a bridge builder. And so when I hear you say what you just said, I 100% agree with you. I think if we were having an open dialogue with other people in the room, and it was a multi-generational room, I sense that probably one person that's from an older generation may say something to this effect. We want you to lead, but we want to make sure that you have what you need to be able to lead. What would your response to that be?
Why can I lead as vice president in the area of AT&T, but I cannot lead as a mentor in a youth program? Like, it's not realistic. So, I want to make sure you have what you need. So first it was go to school, get a good education, you can get a good job, right? We did that. We didn't get a good job. Well, if we did, the pay wasn't great. But, we go into these spaces very equipped. And equipped enough for you to expect a tithe, right? Equipped enough for you expect for us not to come back home. Equipped enough that you expect us to climb a corporate ladder. But somehow when we get to church, and some of these churches, we're managing more people at work than they'll see in their congregation. But somehow we're not ready. And I just don't know what it takes to be ready, other than the numbers to roll by, the years to roll by. So I don't understand this whole equipping. And then another thing is, if you've grown up in the church and you've had me in your church for 25 years and I'm still not ready, or 30 years and I'm still not ready, or 35 years and I'm still not ready, that might be less my fault and more yours.
Yeah, that's you're definitely raising some good points, and nothing you've said is wrong. I wonder what on-the-job training does, though, in terms of character development. So seeing it differently from the standpoint of not so much the actual functions of the job, right? So whether or not you can put a program together, whether or not you can do the marketing, the branding, leading the people, as much as it is character development. I have, over my time of being a senior in senior leadership within the church, and I served a number of years in higher education as well. It was interesting because oftentimes the moment that I got into the seat of leadership and was the one helping to make HR decisions and things of that nature, it became this us versus them mindset for many people that we were leading. And, we, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a bridge builder. So we worked hard to try to say to people, there needs to be a level of respect for the roles that people play, but we can collaborate, right? We can create a collaborative environment. And the challenges that I kept seeing and facing with those that may be considered in this millennial context were not issues of function as much as it was issues of character. And, even as I've had these discussions in other settings, for me, that becomes a part of that. Not that it should hold anything back. I actually think that we should figure out ways, and I say we, you and I included in that, and the church and all of those things, figure out ways to have healthy dialogue, healthy engagement, and know what that pipeline looks like and be solutions oriented and work towards getting to the yes. But I think a part of that has to be that we've got to have people to acknowledge where are you at in terms of your character development. What are your thoughts there?
Well, but that's my issue. Raised in the church, they're there for 18 years and you didn't have any hand in their character development. They've been in the church for 30 years, 35 years, and they still don't have the character that will at least allow them to begin to lead. Like, I think we're missing something in church. If we can be responsible for people for this amount of time and they can lack character, that they still have like major red flag integrity issues that you don't see in adults. Because let's just be honest, we all have character and integrity issues at some point in our lives, or we're lacking in one area or another. And so I don't think that's generationally, but that we're lacking in a way that excludes us from leadership. And if we look up, we can see oftentimes we've seen people in leadership who were older, who lacked character development, who lacked integrity, who lacked just random people skills, and that's never an issue. So I think we need to, like you said, you have to develop some actual resources and programming that will help churches to be clearly strategic about development, but it can't be an excuse when you've held them, for that many years. And so I think people talk about, I'm responsible for a person's soul. So you're telling me you're developing a soul and that never translates into character development?
That's good.
Someone's soul, and you somehow mastered that, but you can't see it in their character. That's problematic too.
Yeah, when in fact, it's actually, it should not be compartmentalized. I say pretty consistently here at our church, teaching on Wednesday nights and things of that nature. We are a spirit that has a soul that lives in a body. We are multidimensional people, and I believe that God is interested in the full development of all of those dimensions. And the church has to be able to create, I believe, mechanisms for all of those dimensions to be developed.
Thanks again for joining us on another episode of the Wise Idea Podcast with Christopher J. Harris. We hope you enjoyed our time together. If you did and would like additional resources and information, you can find the previous episodes, show notes, featured guest information, and more at www.thewiseideapodcast.com. We also invite you to join the conversation on social media. The Wise Idea Podcast is on Twitter and Facebook. Find us at The Wise Idea and at our Facebook group, The Wise Idea Podcast. On Instagram, find us at The Wise Idea Podcast. Our host is also on social media. You can find him regularly on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Pinterest, all located at CJ Harris 1. Finally, if you enjoyed what you've heard, head over to iTunes and or Google Play and leave a rating and review for other listeners to find us. Our podcast is also on Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Thanks again for joining us. We will see you the next time. Live wisely.
understanding. The same was the missing principal thing.